Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and again, welcome to the second annual SpaceNews Awards ceremony. And we are excited once again to be a sponsor of this banquet. Many of you may not be familiar with Cobham, so let me spend a few minutes telling you about the company and giving you a little background of what we do in our heritage in space. Cobham is a British company focused on providing technology solutions for the aerospace, defense, and commercial marketplace. The company here in the U.S. has over 3,700 employees and does about $1 billion a year in annual sales, a good deal of which is for the space industry, supporting over 120 space vehicles and launch vehicles. When you think about human spaceflight, we've supported programs such as Orion, the International Space Station, and the CST-100 Starliner. We do have quite a bit of footprint with our very important military and national security space asset customers. So we look forward to our continued partnership with this forum. We look forward to continuing to advance the technologies related to space, and we hope to see you back next year. Thank you, and let me go ahead and introduce the SpaceNews Editor-in-Chief, Brian Berger.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to Cobham again for being the anchor sponsor of the SpaceNews Awards 2 years in a row. Before we get into announcing the awards, I've been asked to say a few things about 2018. Thank God it's almost over. But I'll elaborate a little bit more than that. And at the risk of stating the obvious, the big story this year was Space Force. The proposal didn't appear to be taken very seriously at first. It was the subject of a lot of late-night comedian fodder, and even pundits kind of got in on the act. But by the middle of the year, it became pretty clear that the Trump administration is serious about reorganizing the way that we do military space. And I think the president's support has made pretty clear that something's going to happen. I'm not going to hazard any guesses about what that might be. There's a few ideas on the table, from Space Corps to Space Force. To this weekend, Sandra reported from the Reagan Forum that a Department of Air and Space Force also appears to be on the table. So what's important in all these proposals is that it appears that there's a consensus that space needs to be given its own voice, and that space also needs to be shielded budgetarily from other aspects of the Air Force. It's very easy for a department made up primarily of pilots to want to prioritize airplanes over space systems. And then finally, if we end up with a solution that provides a career path for military space officers, so that space isn't just one stop on the way to the top, I think a lot will have been accomplished, probably for the good. Regardless of what happens at the organizational level, I think perhaps one of the most important things happening for industry is that Air Force procurement priorities appear to be shifting from least cost, technically acceptable solution to speed. General Hyten in particular wants to field systems much more rapidly than in the past. They need to be resilient to attack, and they also need to be able to be reconstituted quickly. In civil space, NASA, again, is saying that it's going to the moon. And the question, once again, is whether the money's going to be there to make that happen. Money aside, I think some things have changed for the better since the vision for space exploration in 2003 set the moon as the goal for the human spaceflight program, not the least of which is that COTS succeeded. We got SpaceX and Orbital ATK, now Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, delivering cargo to the International Space Station. And the Commercial Crew Program is months away from conducting its initial launches. So NASA also seems to be interested in embracing commercial solutions to make exploration happen. And that is a big difference from where we were 15 years ago. But getting back to the money point for a moment, President Trump has said that in 2020 he'd like to see the budget cut by as much as 5%. And the impact could be huge on NASA if that happens, and especially with the loss of major supporters in John Culberson, and Bill Nelson. NASA Administrator Bridenstine told the National Space Council's Users Advisory Group before Thanksgiving that such a cut would mean we're not going to have what we need to go to the moon. Looking beyond the moon to Mars, we landed there again last week, once again, with a CubeSat assist. That was pretty exciting in terms of kind of proving that CubeSats aren't just for science experiments. But NASA's long-term plans for sample return and human missions remain unclear at this point. In commercial space, mega constellations are still very much a thing. There are probably more constellations on file with the SEC than there are constellations in the night sky. And because of this, commercial operators are still kind of taking a wait-and-see approach and before making big investments. And we're seeing this kind of play out in the number of GEO orders that we're seeing. To the best of our knowledge, this year so far, there's only been about 5 geostationary satellites ordered commercially. And that's going to have an impact on launch a couple years from now. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some consolidation in the year ahead. It seems to be coming. EchoStar and Eutelsat both took a run at buying Inmarsat. Didn't get very far, but there was interest. And then on the manufacturing side of the house, Maxar Technologies is looking for a buyer for its GEO line, and that's supposed to come to a head one way or the other pretty soon. So, as I mentioned, all this could have an impact on launch. Fewer GEO orders this year means fewer launches 2 or 3 years from now. SpaceX and Arianespace will feel it. ILS will feel it. SpaceX and Arianespace and others are starting to pick up some small satellite launches. In fact, this afternoon, SpaceX is going to conduct a dedicated small sat launch with some 64 payloads on board. But they're also facing competition from a new crop of dedicated small launch vehicle providers. And these companies have proven that they can raise money, that they can reach orbit. Now they just have to prove that they can reach profitability. Finally, 2018, like every other year for nearly a decade, was supposed to be the year that suborbital space tourism was going to happen. Maybe next year. So now we'll move into what you all have been waiting for, or at least part of what you've all been waiting for, and that would be the presentation of the SpaceNews Awards for Excellence and Innovation. We established these awards as a way to kind of honor individuals, companies, and organizations shaping the global space community. The way we went about this is we had an open nomination process in September for the 350,000 people who visit our website each month. Then the SpaceNews editorial team winnowed it down to a short list of 5 to 10 finalists per category. And then finally, we made our selections. And that brings us to today. It's my distinct honor to reveal our finalists, announce the 10 winners, and say a few words about why they won. Brings us to our first category. The Unsung Hero Award recognizes those who toil behind the scenes or outside the limelight to make the big things happen. The finalists this year are Steve Volz from NOAA, the Delta II rocket, Dan Rasky of NASA Ames, Space Angels. I'm pretty sure that's the investors, not the celestial beings. And Tom Mueller of SpaceX. That's enough suspense. The winner is Tom Mueller of SpaceX. So it's sometimes easy to forget that SpaceX is more than just Elon Musk. Twitter ensures that. But SpaceX is a company of some 7,000 people, and one of the most important to SpaceX's success was also one of the first on board. Tom helped Elon found SpaceX in 2002. It was the same year that Tom's longtime employer, TRW, sold its space business to Northrop Grumman. Tom and his team invented the Merlin 1A and Kestrel 4 engines for Falcon 1, and then turned their attention to Falcon 9's Merlin 1C, 1D, and Merlin vacuum engines that are keys to making the booster reusable. More recently, Mueller has devoted his attention to the reusable Raptor engines for Starship, and that's the launcher that SpaceX is building for interplanetary travel. Tom once told an audience in 2017 that the rocket, previously known as BFR, has the potential to reduce space transportation costs by a factor of 100. Not so long ago, it was popular to dismiss such bold claims by SpaceX. But with 18 launches in 2017, 18 so far this year, that count's going to be 19, about 130. It's going to be 20 tomorrow afternoon. Claims by SpaceX's propulsion chief are becoming harder to discount. Tom, please come up and receive your award.
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Our next award is Turnaround of the Year. And this one recognizes the successful turnaround of a company, agency, program, or community within the last 2 years or so. This year's finalists are Florida's Space Coast, Aerojet Rocketdyne's AR-22 engine, Firefly Aerospace, and Iridium Communications. And the winner is Florida's Space Coast. So the Space Coast isn't just our turnaround of the year. They're an early frontrunner for turnaround of the decade. NASA, Space Florida, and really the entire 321 area code are being honored today for working together to turn the end of the space shuttle program into a new beginning for the Florida Space Coast. To us, one of the clearest signs that the Space Coast has rebounded is that there's now space commerce on Space Commerce Way. Blue Origin opened a new factory there this year across from where OneWeb is getting ready to build thousands of small broadband satellites. NASA's commitment to turn KSC into a multi-user spaceport has sparked an increase in launch activity that's helped stimulate tourism to the point that Space Commerce Way now needs to be widened to accommodate the extra traffic. To this point, the Kennedy Space Center has now surpassed Disney World as the top-ranked destination in Orlando. So that's actually good news for parents if anybody's actually taken the family down there. So the Florida Space Coast revitalization and turnaround was in large part due to Space Florida, which offered economic incentives to attract new development and investment in the region. So I'm happy that we have here today, accepting the award of Turnaround of the Year, Janet Petro, Deputy Director of Kennedy Space Center, and Jillian Pierce, Space Florida's Federal Government's Relationship Manager. Congratulations, Janet. And let me get yours for you. Congratulations to everybody at Space Florida. And please make sure to extend all the warm wishes to the entire 321 area code. Our next award is for Breakthrough of the Year. This recognizes both business, policy, and technology breakthroughs with the potential to alter the space landscape. I don't think we've recognized a space policy breakthrough yet, but I'm sure one will be coming soon enough, and it could happen. It really could. So this year's finalists are NASA's MARCO. Those are the pair of CubeSats that assisted Mars Insight in relaying telemetry when it made its landing a week ago today. Falcon Heavy, which made its debut in February. ESA's Remove Debris mission, and ICEYE X1, which is a commercial small-sat SAR satellite. The winner is Falcon Heavy. This is actually one of those breakthroughs that took quite a while to break through. When Elon Musk formally announced Falcon Heavy in 2011, he said the rocket would be delivered to the launch site in late 2012, and then with liftoff to follow soon after. That liftoff ended up taking about 5 years later than he predicted. But after it finally made its debut this February, we all remember the twin side boosters making side-by-side landings back at Cape Canaveral, while its Tesla Roadster set a course for path past Mars. Musk admitted that SpaceX had tried to cancel the program more than once. I think he said 3 times, and probably spent more than $500 million on its development. The market for Falcon Heavy is hard to gauge. Falcon 9 has been upgraded to carry payloads that once would have required Falcon Heavy. And SpaceX's next generation reusable launcher, the rocket formerly known as BFR, now it's the Super Heavy and Starship, they have far more performance still. Still in the months since Falcon Heavy debuted, SpaceX has lined up customers. Several commercial satellite operators have signed contracts, and the Air Force certified Falcon Heavy for national security payloads and awarded $130 million for a classified contract or a classified mission this summer. So for those customers and for SpaceX, it appears that the wait was worth it. Accepting the Breakthrough of the Year award is Tom Mueller of SpaceX.
Congratulations again.
Congratulations to Tom and everybody at SpaceX. Our next award goes to the Government Agency of the Year. This recognizes the role that government continues to play in the global space enterprise. Only space agencies founded since 1958 are eligible for this award. Well, you have to draw the line somewhere. Actually, this award recognizes the accomplishments and contributions of any government agency, directorate, or office with a hand in space. You don't have to be a full-fledged agency. Our finalists this year are DARPA, NASA, the UK Space Agency, the European Space Agency, and the UAE Space Agency. And the winner is the European Space Agency. To explain why we chose ESA, let's focus on the enormous technical challenges that ESA overcame this year to launch 2 of the year's more ambitious missions. Bepi Colombo's voyage to Mercury and a wind-sensing satellite called EOLIS. Bepi Colombo began its 7-year journey to October when its European and Japanese orbiters lifted off on an Ariane 5 rocket. The $2 billion program took nearly 2 decades to come to fruition and was very nearly derailed by the complexity of its ion electric propulsion system. It also had some trouble with the challenges of finding materials durable enough to withstand the temperatures as high as 800 degrees. The program manager had compared this mission to flying into a pizza oven. So ESA, but the mission this year has been a success. EOLIS might seem easy by comparison, but it wasn't. ESA struggled for more than a decade with its key instrument, a Doppler laser capable of measuring wind in a cloud-free atmosphere. EOLIS will fill what some have called the largest data gap in meteorology. Both missions took far longer than expected and blew through their initial cost estimates, as big and ambitious missions tend to do. But ESA persevered and succeeded doing the type of daring missions only a leading space agency can even contemplate. Congratulations to the European Space Agency. Accepting the award for Agency of the Year on behalf of the European Space Agency is Micheline Tabash, the head of ESA's Washington office. Congratulations.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to this luncheon. It's a great opportunity, of course, for me to say thank you because you are giving us, the European Space Agency, an award. Now I should say I'm proud for this award. I'm not proud. I'm happy because it's not my work. It's the work of the European Space Agency. But it's really a pleasure to get this award because we try to be innovative, we try to be excellent, we try to serve the citizens and to serve space. So therefore, thank you very much to all of you, and I hope to see you in person as soon as possible.
Our next award is Government Leader of the Year. The shorthand for this sometimes is the Military Government Leader of the Year, but that kind of has the wrong connotation. No? Nobody? Okay. So this award recognizes government leaders for significant contributions to their organizations and the broader space communities. Our finalists this year are Heather Wilson of the U.S. Air Force, Mike Griffin of OSD, and Betty Sapp of the National Reconnaissance Office. And the winner is Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson. Well before President Trump directed the Pentagon to lay the groundwork for establishing a Space Force as a full-fledged 6th branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, Secretary Wilson had already made it her mission to transform the way the Air Force organizes and equips its air, space, and cyber forces to prevail in the 21st century's inherently multi-domain conflicts. As a former member of the House Armed Services Committee, she understands that it'll take an act of Congress to establish a new military service to stand alongside the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard. And as an Air Force Academy graduate, well past the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, all the way to the end, and as a Rhodes Scholar, and as a Doctor of International Relations who served NATO in Belgium, and at the tail end of the Cold War, where she watched the Soviet Union collapse in service to the White House National Security Council, Secretary Wilson knows as well as anyone in Washington what's at stake in the U.S. and for the U.S. and its allies in the unfolding great powers competition with its geopolitical rivals. Secretary Wilson also understands both the technical, political, and diplomatic challenges involved in defending the United States and its allies against counterspace threats from China, Russia, and other potential adversaries. And she's challenged the status quo to push major new changes to prepare for those counterspace threats while also empowering the smarter, faster delivery of space capabilities. Thanks to her leadership, Air Force modernization efforts are well funded headed into 2019. Next year's budget battle promises to be a little tougher, but we know she's up for it. And judging from how she fared in our online poll, thousands of readers think so too. I'll close with a quote from one of the Space News readers who nominated Dr. Wilson for this award. Wilson understands the loudest person in the room does not always bring forth the best ideas, but instead leverages critical thinking skills of a team to build the most productive answers to our nation's hardest challenges. Congratulations to Secretary Wilson. Congratulations. Keeping with the government, our next award is for the Civil Space Government Leader of the Year. This award is awarded along a lot of the same lines as the previous one, just for civil space. So to save a little time, we'll go right to the finalists. Our finalists are Mohammed Al-Ababi of UAE Space Agency, Jim Bridenstine of NASA, Jan Werner of ESA, and Bill Gerstenmaier of NASA. And our winner is Bill Gerstenmaier of NASA. Known universally as Gerst, William Gerstenmaier took the helm of the NASA Space Operations Mission Directorate in 2005 and 2011 in his current role. And since he's been on board, NASA's undergone a number of big changes. He started out with a vision for space exploration. Obama took over in 2009, and the focus kind of shifted away from the moon back to laying a technological roadmap for Mars, an asteroid redirect mission. And one thing's kind of been constant throughout all of this, and that person is Gerstenmaier. He oversees a human spaceflight activities group that includes the ISS, the Space Launch System in Orion, commercial crew, and planning for human missions beyond Earth orbit. He oversaw Space Shuttle's return to flight following the 2003 Columbia accident and presided over the shuttle's 2011 retirement. And so programs like Asteroid Redirect have kind of come and gone, and even long-running programs have presented their share of challenges, such as October's Soyuz abort and the ongoing debate about ending federal funding for ISS in the mid-2020s, although it's worth noting that Soyuz is back in service. It launched successfully this morning. Everybody's safe. An impressive return to flight for the program. But through all these challenges, Gerstenmaier has provided stability and continuity that's given confidence to NASA's workforce and reassurance to industry and Congress. He's also embraced changes such as making greater use of partnerships with the private sector, and he's backed plans to take a more commercial approach to the Lunar Gateway's first module, the power and propulsion element, which is based on a commercial satellite bus. His endorsement of the approach quieted skeptics on NASA's advisories group, because when Gerst speaks, people listen. Gerst, of course, was in Baikonur this morning for the launch. Accepting the award on his behalf is his deputy, Tony Mumford. So congratulations to William Gerstenmaier. Our next award is Deal of the Year. This award recognizes major investments, landmark contracts, and of course, mergers and acquisitions. The finalists this year are Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport's Landing Rocket Lab as a tenant, Lockheed Martin winning a $7.2 billion GPS-3 contract, Northrop Grumman acquiring Orbital ATK, and the U.S. Air Force's $2.3 billion in LSA awards. The winner is the launch service agreements. We found that in a year of investments and acquisitions, the most influential deal this year involved a set of awards by the Air Force that sets the stage for a potential realignment of the U.S. launch industry. The launch service agreement contracts the Air Force awarded in October to Blue Origin, Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, and United Launch Alliance are intended to support development of a new generation of launch vehicles to provide improved access to space and to end reliance on Atlas V and its Russian engine. The LSA awards were likely make or break for at least two of the winners. It's unlikely ULA would have been able to continue Vulcan Centaur without the nearly $1 billion the Air Force has now pledged to the project. And it's hard to imagine that Northrop Grumman would stick with Omega without its award. Blue Origin, though, is a different story. Jeff Bezos would have continued development of New Glenn even if they had lost. The $500 million Blue Origin now stands to receive from the Air Force will go to specific capabilities to support national security missions that Blue Origin might not otherwise have developed, such as a launch site at Vandenberg Air Force Base. LSA was also a major deal for those who didn't win, SpaceX. Many thought they were a shoo-in, but they came away empty-handed. But with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy already in service, and therefore not really in need of additional development dollars, the Air Force might not have seen value in investing in BFR. Like the Air Force's last major effort to develop a new launch vehicles, that would be the EELV program in the 1990s, LSA expects the winners to have skin in the game. EELV produced two technically excellent rockets, the Atlas V and the Delta IV, but the commercial business that Boeing and Lockheed were counting on never really materialized, ultimately forcing them to combine their launch operations into ULA. The Air Force and industry hope that this time will be different. But even if it is, the Air Force plans to buy launches from only two companies during the next phase of the program. SpaceX, despite not winning one of those LSA awards this time, will be eligible for this Phase 2 competition. So without a doubt, it's a very high stakes race that will shape the future of the American launch industry. Accepting the award on behalf of LSA are Colonel Robert Bonjovi, the Director of the Launch Enterprise Systems Director at the Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center in Los Angeles. You could come up, Colonel. I'd also like to recognize two other individuals from SMC who are with us who had a key role in LSA. And that would be Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Spencer, the branch chief of the Launch Enterprise Systems Directorate, and Mr. David Sharp, the Directorate's Agreements Officer. Congratulations, gentlemen.
Give the award to you.
Next award is Corporate Leader of the Year. This recognizes company executives for significant contributions to their companies and to the broader space community. The finalists this year are Tori Bruno of United Launch Alliance, Matt Desch of Iridium, Steven Spangler of Intelsat, and Bob Smith of Blue Origin. The winner is Steven Spangler of Intelsat. Some of you might remember in 2016 that the chairman of the FCC at the time, Tom Wheeler, issued a blunt warning to the satellite industry. He said, "It is far more practical to get on the train than to be run over by it." He was referring, of course, to 5G and the satellite industry's reluctance to share spectrum. Steven Spangler took a bold stance when he joined forces with chipmaker Intel just over a year ago on a proposal to relinquish some of the satellite's coveted C-band spectrum for 5G cellular networks in the United States. When he decided it was better for Intelsat to get on the train, or at least run alongside it rather than jump in front of it, he took a lot of flack. A regional operator called the proposal a disaster for the whole industry. Eutelsat said it was taken by surprise. Telesat said it would oppose it vigorously. Well, since then, Eutelsat, Telesat, and SES, the three operators, besides Intelsat, with the most at stake, have all backed the plan through a group that they call the C-Band Alliance. It's too early to say how successful the C-Band Alliance will be in getting the FCC to back their plans to reassign some, but not too much C-Band for 5G. Investors seem to think that Intelsat will come out ahead. Shares of the company's stock have soared this year, under $4 a share in January to $37 in October before the broader sell-off began. It's a solid turnaround considering where things stood after a SoftBank brokered OneWeb merger fell through. This year, Spangler and his team finished deploying its Epic NG high-throughput satellite system, earning itself a few more years of breathing room while the mega constellation market shakes out. Congratulations to Steven Spangler. The penultimate award goes to the Startup of the Year. This award essentially recognizes space startups that achieved a breakthrough year. Our finalists this year were Rocket Lab, Blue Canyon, Kepler Communications, Capella Space, and Relativity Space. The winner is Rocket Lab. We got some fans. So I have a little story to tell about Rocket Lab. Their founder, Peter Beck, visited Space News 4 years ago, came to our offices down in Alexandria to brief us on the plans for small satellites. They wanted to provide an alternative to small satellite operators to piggybacking. They wanted to give them a dedicated launch. And I have to tell you that the editorial team was somewhat skeptical. Our art director at the time, though, this guy's an intuitive empath who I think in a past life might have been Shirley MacLaine. He was sure that Beck and Rocket Lab would succeed. And so here we are. 2018 was a breakout year for Rocket Lab. In January, they reached orbit for the first time with an Electron rocket named Still Testing. In November, its business time deployed satellites for Spire and GeoOptics. That marked Rocket Lab's first commercial launch. And preparations are currently underway for an early December, maybe, launch of a collection of NASA small sats on a rocket named, clever name still to come? Okay, Brad's shaking his head. Not only did they become a bona fide launch service provider this year, they also became a bona fide unicorn. Rocket Lab announced November 15th that it raised $140 million in its latest funding round. That brings to date the total raised to $288 million with a valuation of $1 billion. That makes them a unicorn in Silicon Valley parlance. Now that Rocket Lab has proven it can reach orbit and raise money, the next step should be easy. Making money. SpaceX retired Falcon 1 for a reason, right? And it wasn't that it couldn't carry a Tesla to Mars. There are literally dozens of small launch vehicles in development around the world. Virgin Orbit and Vector expect to make their debuts in the months ahead. And Chinese companies like Landspace could soon be affordable options for some non-US customers. So with so many vehicles in development and uncertain demand from the small sat companies, a shakeout looks likely. If so, Rocket Lab, with an operational rocket now and a war chest of funding, is well positioned to be one of the survivors. Accepting the award on behalf of Rocket Lab is Brad Schneider, Rocket Lab's Vice President of Launch Services. This brings us at last to Company of the Year. I think the name of this award pretty much speaks for itself. The finalists are Iridium Communications, Intelsat, United Launch Alliance, Lockheed Martin, Blue Origin, and SpaceX. The award this year goes to Iridium. Any way you slice it, Iridium had a good year. Working with SpaceX and their spacecraft contractors, Thales Alenia Space and Northrop Grumman Innovation Systems, Iridium put to bed concerns about deploying their second generation constellation. They're just one launch away, really, from the final 10 satellites. If they get this off December 30th as scheduled or shortly into the new year, in any event, they got some breathing room to make the second anniversary of the January 14th, 2017 launch of the first batch of satellites. So that'll be 2 years from the first launch to completing the refresh of the constellation. Iridium's legacy constellation has been in space for nearly 2 decades. It's lasted 3 times longer than I think it was expected to last. And Iridium is deorbiting these satellites as they're taken out of service. And in doing so, they're setting a good example for a good example of orbital stewardship for all the new operators coming down the pike. Iridium has been pretty good to its shareholders this year as well. Its second quarter revenue was a new personal best that they went on to beat the following quarter. Iridium's share price nearly doubled this year as I think Wall Street kind of shed its fears about constellation deployment and began to look toward a future where Iridium and their expertise in machine-to-machine satellite communications positions them well to serve the coming emerging Internet of Things market. Once Iridium's final batch of satellites launched later this month or early next year, the company can embark on a hard-earned CapEx holiday expected to last a decade or more and begin paying down its debt. Accepting the award on behalf of Iridium is company CEO Matt Desch. Here you go. So let's give one final round of applause to all of our winners. And now it's my distinct honor to invite to podium Kay Sears, Vice President of General Manager of Military Space at Lockheed Martin, to introduce today's final speaker. Okay?
Good afternoon. Big thanks to Space News and the Washington Space Business Roundtable for hosting us all here today. And congratulations to all of the winners. It's my privilege to introduce the Honorable Heather Wilson, the 24th Secretary of the Air Force. As an Air Force veteran, Air Force Academy graduate, Rhodes Scholar, congressional representative, and now Space News Military Leader of the Year, Secretary Wilson's credentials and expertise are unparalleled. She has taken the reins of the Air Force at an incredibly dynamic time in national security space. New threats are emerging, new technologies are evolving. Space is not the pristine high ground that it once was for our warfighters. And yet, as Secretary Wilson recognizes, these volatile times reward those who are decisive and resolute. She understands the challenges ahead of us and is spearheading transformational efforts to maintain and secure American leadership in space, not just today, but far into the future. Working within the Air Force and across the services in a multi-domain environment, Secretary Wilson is moving to accelerate acquisition, drive innovation, and embrace rapid prototyping. And she is a steadfast advocate for getting more powerful and more resilient space capabilities into the hands of our warfighters as quickly and as affordably as possible. She is challenging conventional wisdom, cutting the red tape, and empowering innovators at every level. We're proud to support the critical Go Fast strategy, and I think I can speak for all of industry when I say we understand your vision and you're fully committed to supporting the Air Force evolving needs with speed, efficiency, and urgency. Please join me in welcoming Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson.
Okay, and Brian, thank you. I'm a little bit surprised listening to all of the people who won awards today that you asked me to be the one to speak, because I have not flown into a pizza oven. I am definitely not better than Disneyland. I have not put a Tesla into space, although we do have a tracking number on that object, by the way. And I'm certainly not a unicorn. So congratulations. But I would say that my children would tell you that sometimes I am the loudest person in the room. So congratulations to all of you for your work and your contributions to America in both civil and national security space. That's really, really quite impressive. I wanted to use the time that we have together here to talk a little about what the Air Force is doing in national security space and some of the results that we're seeing. And I kind of reflect back on the time that seems like a long time ago now, when I was preparing for my confirmation as Secretary of the Air Force. And when I was drafting my confirmation testimony, I actually couldn't say space and warfighting in the same sentence. At least I was told that by someone who was something of a holdover from the previous administration in the civil service, and I told the person that they would have to get someone more senior to tell me that I couldn't say that. Since then, there is a broad understanding that space is a warfighting domain just like land and sea and air. The President has reestablished the National Space Council, and we have a national space strategy that provides a framework and gives us guidance to protect our vital national interests in space. The President's fiscal year 19 budget that we are now implementing, his 5-year budget increased and accelerated defendable space with $7 billion in additional funding to the base budget and reprogramming of another $5 billion to accelerate defendable space. America is the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they are seeking to develop the capability to deny us the use of space in crisis or war. So the Air Force is accelerating defendable space, focusing on really three things: developing the strategies and concepts of operation and the programs to implement those strategies for a contested domain. Second, implementing acquisition reform. And third, building strong partnerships. Now, while this audience understands, I actually find most people don't really know what we do in space and why it really matters to our economy and to our military. The Air Force operates 77 satellites in space, and the Navy has another 13 for some special communications needs. The National Reconnaissance Office is our joint special program with the CIA that has grown into a standalone entity, but it is still about 40% Air Force people, and the NRO specializes in the intelligence collection in space, mostly pictures, but also other things. So the intelligence part we do jointly with the CIA and something called the NRO, but our other missions are also important. The Air Force does missile warning. We detect the intense heat of rocket launches, and we rapidly calculate where they're heading to tell the National Command Authority what's happening and what we must do next. 33 of our 77 satellites that the Air Force operates are GPS, that wonderful invention that gives you that blue dot on your phone. It's operated by a squadron of about 40 young airmen in Schriever Air Force Base outside Colorado Springs, Colorado. Average age 22, which scares me every time I say that. That not only gives you the blue dot on your phone, it gives the timing signal for the New York Stock Exchange and for every automated teller machine in America. We also communicate in space, ensuring that the president can give orders reliably to his commanders in the field around the globe, no matter what, with absolute reliability. We watch the weather from space. We monitor treaty compliance, including detection of nuclear tests. And the Air Force operates the launch facilities for America to get to space, civil and military. The declining cost of launch and the shrinking size of payloads has made space accessible to more countries and companies. Space is rapidly becoming a common domain for human endeavor. So we built these missions and the capabilities to carry out these missions at a time where space was not a contested environment, and we operated them like your most reliable utility company for 60 years. And our adversaries watched us. They watched how we relied on space for every military mission from the Gulf War on. In 2007, China demonstrated the ability to launch a missile from the ground and destroy one of their own dead weather satellites. And the irony is that we have been warning the Chinese about the potential impact of the debris that they created on their own satellites since that day. There's something weird about that. We must now not only provide these vital capabilities from space, but we have to be able to do so when under attack. The strategies to prevail in space, as we do in the air and on the ground and at sea, began to be developed under my predecessor and have been given renewed momentum and focus by both increased funding and an emphasis on the shift to warfighting in space. Over the last 18 months, particularly leading up to the fiscal year 19 budget proposal and submission, the Air Force did extensive wargaming and simulation to inform our program choices that were included in the President's budget and that now Congress has approved. I'm not going to go into detail here, but I will say that the analytical work that informed our strategic and programmatic choices was some of the best that I have seen in my time as Secretary of the Air Force. And that research and analysis was done primarily by Air Force Space Command. We turned our analysis into a war game to illustrate options and choices for senior leaders in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. In our fiscal year 19 budget, there were two big changes that the Chief of Staff and I testified about. Two things that we asked the Congress to engage with us on and consider. The first was advanced battle management and canceling a program called JSTARS and going in a different direction. And the second was accelerating defendable space, including the cancellation of a couple of large projects. Last year, as we stewarded our budget through the Congress, we conducted almost 25 tabletop exercises, including with the key leaders in Congress in classified session. And to me, the interesting story in that presentation of last year's Air Force budget is the dog that didn't bark. Our program for accelerating defendable space wasn't really controversial because we got so many people to engage with us in a complicated tabletop exercise to show them where we would reprogram $5 billion and add another 7 to accelerate defendable space. And the Congress supported it without a lot of public debate or criticism or discussion. We continue to develop and pressure test those strategies so that we use every dollar that we are given well, and we continue to dominate in space. Last week, the Chief of Staff and I directed another 90-day review with red teams and the best intelligence that we have to inform our fiscal year 21 budget submission and validate the strategies and the programs that we have in order to continue to dominate in space. So strategies, concepts of operation tied to programs in our 5-year budget is one of the big things the Air Force is focused on. Secondly, we have focused on implementing acquisition reform. Now, when I was in Congress, like everyone else, I advocated for acquisition reform. It's a whole lot easier to advocate for it than to implement it. I would even go so far as to say that we are implementing it in the Air Force more aggressively and systematically than in any other entity in government. Space is a good example, but it is only an example of what the Air Force is doing. And I have some wonderful help with a great team. Will Roper and Darlene Costello and J.T. Thompson and people like Colonel Bon Jovi and his team are a great team of professionals that are all A players when it comes to excellence in acquisition. In April, we began restructuring the Space and Missile Systems Center to be more muscular and more agile. We flattened the organization by removing 3 layers of bureaucracy, and we empowered program executive officers with full decision authority on their programs, taking advantage of the congressional change that pushed more acquisition authority back to the services so that we could make faster and smarter decisions. I kept none of that authority at my level. There is not a program manager in the Air Force that needs to come and brief me before a decision is made. And that's because I know I don't add any value to their decision. But what I can add is time and complexity in a bureaucracy. And it's my job to strip that away so that Colonel Bon Jovi and his team can get after it and do the work. We created 3 new program executives in space, which before was our largest program executive officer. And rather than keep that concentrated over a $7 billion portfolio, we now have 3 PEOs for space. PEO for Space Development, Program Executive Office for Space Production, and the Program Executive Office for Space Enterprise. The changes were intended to accelerate the speed of decisions and improve program execution, to buy things faster and smarter. The Space and Missile Systems Center identified 9 pace-setter programs to prove out the concepts of this reorganization. It's not enough to just reorganize and redo the org chart. We have to identify programs that are supposed to prove out why those changes would make a difference. The central reorganization reached initial operating capability last month, but it has been notching up achievements all year. In January, we established the Space Enterprise Consortium to minimize the barriers to entry for small businesses and non-traditional vendors to be able to supply military space. It started with $100 million, and we've increased it since then, because the consortium has grown to 223 companies in just 11 months. 78% of them are small and non-traditional defense contractors. Using the rapid prototyping and fielding authorities that were given to us by Congress in November of 2017, this year the Space and Missile Systems Center alone has contracted for 34 prototypes in 6 different projects, approximately $110 million in value to members of the consortium. And we just reached the 1-year anniversary of getting those authorities from Congress, which is why I say the Air Force is leaning forward in implementing acquisition reform probably more than any other entity in government. The average time for awarded prototypes from a request for proposal to actually signing a contract is 90 days in that consortium, twice as fast, more than twice as fast as traditional contracting. You'll notice 2 characteristics here in these programs: speed and competition, both of which will help us to drive innovation. In the 9 Pacesetter programs that we're using to validate our new approach to acquisition, we've stripped 19 years out of acquisition time from their schedules. 19 years stripped out of 9 Pacesetter programs. In September, we used new authorities on 4 contracts for protected tactical satellite communications to get secure communications to 2 Navy carrier strike groups where we were facing a potential 2-year gap in coverage. And we used those authorities, and actually we're delivering a capability to them 18 months early. We canceled the 7th and 8th missile warning satellites and turned toward more survivable alternatives. We're using the authorities that Congress has given us to prototype in order to reduce acquisition time for those replacements, for those new generation of missile warning satellites, and we're saving 3.5 years in time by doing so. We started 2 satellites in August and 2 payload contracts in September. Again, prototyping to go fast and reduce risk, using competition to drive innovation and give us options. But it's not just satellite communications where we're doing this. The GPS 3F contract for jam-resistant GPS was awarded September 26th. That contract will develop the first 2 next-generation jam-resistant GPS satellites, and they'll provide an option to buy up to 20 additional jam-resistant GPS satellites. That's a $7.2 billion contract. It was awarded 6 months early and saved $1.6 billion compared to the independent cost estimate. The first GPS-3 satellite will launch on a Falcon 9 on December 18th from our launch facilities in Florida, and I'm trying to work my schedule to get there. While space isn't the only area where we are aggressively implementing acquisition improvements, it is a significant one, as it must be, to meet the emerging threats that our nation faces. But it's not just acquisition reform and changes to our strategies and concepts of operations that will help to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We are building partnerships. Nations with allies thrive, and those without allies do not, as Secretary Mattis likes to say. The National Space Strategy calls for stronger international partnerships to deter potential adversaries, to promote burden sharing, and to marshal cooperative responses to any threat. In October, we held the Schriever War Games at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. We've been doing it for several years. The U.S. was joined this year by participants from the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Germany, France, and for the first time, Japan. The war game looked at a variety of space conflict scenarios 10 years from now. Our partnership with Japan continues to grow, and they are going to be hosting a U.S. space situational awareness payload on 2 of Japan's version of their global positioning satellites, and that is progressing well. That first payload will be delivered in November of 2021, and the second payload will be delivered in April of 2022. And we've partnered with Norway to extend protected tactical satellite communications to the polar region by putting 2 U.S. payloads on Norwegian satellites. That will save the United States about $900 million and avoids a 2-year gap in polar communications coverage. Last year, we opened the aperture for our international partners to attend more basic and advanced Air Force space training courses. At the same time, we increased the length of undergraduate space training and increased the security classification level so we could hold candid discussions on the threats that we face. We will work with like-minded nations, with our allies, to strengthen operations, enhance deterrence, defend our vital national interests, and prevailed when called upon to do so. While we think of alliances and partnerships with other countries, one happened recently closer to home that I haven't seen talked about publicly heretofore. The United States Air Force recently got a call from CAL FIRE, the California firefighting entity. It was taking 12 to 18 hours for California airplanes to analyze data for firefighting officials during those horrific wildfires. In less than 10 hours from that phone call to the Space and Missile Systems Center, less than 10 hours from when they got the call to help, we contracted and got some partners in order to get data streaming to firefighters. Our industry partners staffed a center 24/7, and the Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center fused the data hourly, 10 times faster than existing means, to save lives in California. That's what airmen do. While Air Force Space is developing strategies, fielding space forces faster and smarter, and strengthening our alliances and attracting new partners, we have a lot more work to do. We look forward to 2020 and beyond. We will continue to analyze alternative strategies, explore new concepts, partner with new and emerging industries, and keep America the best in the world at space. Thank you all.